Hello, everybody. My name's Andy Mason. I'm the Heritage Officer at Spurn, and I'm going to take you on a journey through time at Spurn. It's an amazing place on the east coast of England, which at the mouth of the Humber Estuary. And thank you very much for citizens for inviting me along to give you this talk. We'll start with the place that I've worked at for the past 6 years, which is Spurn National Nature Reserve. It's owned by Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and it's been owned since 1960 and run as a nature reserve since that time. It has lots and lots of features about it. It's a finger of land that runs out from the end of the Holderness coast into the mouth of the Humber Estuary, and it's about 3.5 miles long. Has a number of different operations and uses that it's had in the past. We'll take you through some of those. But really, we go right back to the beginning and when Sperm was actually formed. So right at the beginning of really the formation of Northern Europe during the last ice age or last ice ages, there was an area called Doggerland just east of Spurn, and that basically joined the UK to the rest of Europe. And that was sort of it ended up with lots and lots of beautiful low-lying pastures and things, and we've got a really amazing fertile plain. So there was lots and lots of material was brought down during the last ice age, and a lot of that was deposited on the Holderness plain as boulder clay. And the animals that we had roaming there were such things as the woolly mammoth, and they roamed around. This was a mammoth tusk found at Spurn in 2008, and it shows just what things were around. This is more than 50,000 years old. So the last ice age finished around about 10,000 years ago. So this has been sitting there in Doggerland in the clays for a long, long time. So it's many years of deposition. But Spurn is really at the mouth of the Humber Estuary because of all this deposition and boulder clay of the Holderness coast. Here's the geography bit. It was washed down, all this material is washed down the Holderness coast after being eroded out of the boulder clay cliffs. And they say up to about 500,000 tons of material is brought down the coast every year. And so a lot of that ends up at Spurn. So Spurn grows out into the mouth of the Humber Estuary with longshore drifted tides, and the waves push from a northerly direction down into the Humber Estuary, and it gets to the point where this macro tidal estuary pushes the material east, and it actually keeps the mouth of the estuary open because there's just a sheer volume of water coming through. Normally, it would form a bar and go straight the way across as a submerged bar, like a lot of other rivers do, but not this one. Spurn is very special. So with all this material coming down the coast, it has formed this amazing set of dunes. Now, we've at the distant of time, it's like of naming Spurn. We're not quite sure of where the name came from, but we're quite sure that the earliest is Ichel's sagas of 600 AD, which mention Hrafn's ear. Hrafn's ear, translated more or less, is sandbank of the raven's tongue, which does sound a real, possibility. It's kind of a shape of a tongue, and it's a tongue of land that sticks out into the Humber Estuary. And the Vikings, and they landed on these sandbanks, and they gave them names so as they could actually locate them for future. And that's probably the earliest example of its name just starting to come through. And you had things that went on there in those distant Viking times in the Middle Ages. But one person that really brought Spurn to prominence was St Wilgils. And Wilgils established a hermitage on Spurn, and this hermitage grew into a small monastery, And from this monastery, his son Willibrord actually went out as a missionary to the Low Countries, Holland, Belgium, and took Christianity to those countries, and was renowned as basically the person that took Christianity to the Low Countries from Spurn. So that's its first real historical sort of bit of data about Spurn. And we get a lot of visitors coming from Belgium, Holland, Denmark, who are interested in the origins of their church. So it's that kind of link to the past. That was around about 700 AD that all this happened. There's a kind of a gap, and there's some times when Spurn was spoke of as Ravensrod or Ravenspurn. Shakespeare talked about it in some of his plays. Richard III and so on has Ravenspurn in there. So the next real sort of like kind of mention of Spurn in historical documents was 1066, when Harold Hardrada actually he took his fleet up to attack Stamford Bridge in York and Fulford, and he was well and truly defeated. In fact, he was killed. So the remains of his fleet ended up down at Spurn, down at Hrafnsburn as they called it then, and they assembled and then cleared off back to Norway, and that was the last assault really on the UK by the Norwegian kings. So you've got that historical link to Spurn as well. Henry Bolingbroke actually landed on Spurn and sort of tried to usurp the crown. So you've got all those sorts of activities that went on. So moving on, you've got into medieval times. Spurn became quite a medieval commerce centre. There was in 1086 there was mention of Ravenser, and that was a small settlement at that time. But then we had mention of in the 1200s later on of Ravensrod, which was a large port, medieval port at the mouth of the Humber. It rivaled the likes of Hull and Grimsby. In fact, there was lots of bad feeling between Grimsby and Ravensrod. So Ravensrod was there. It was a thriving port, had mills, had churches, it had a burg. It was quite a place. So it disappeared towards the middle of the 13th century. It just started to get washed away. The Humber had changed its tidal patterns, and more erosion had taken place of Spurn, and it was washed away. So again, this whole story of villages and towns on the east coast, the Holderness coast, being established and then washed away not too long after they were actually established. So you've got Ravensrod was quite something. Moving on into the next time, you've got more shipping and trade was coming into the Humber, particularly going up further up to Grimsby and Hull. So Spurn became quite a hazard. It always has been a hazard. Lots and lots of ships have been wrecked on Spurn. But for commerce and for trade, it became a real problem. There's a part of Spurn known as the Binks, which used to be called the dread of the Humber, and ships literally used to dread going down the coast to this point. If you hit it at the wrong state of tide in the wrong winds, it would roll the ship over, and that would be no more ships. So they had to do something about this. In 1427, a gentleman called Richard Reid Barrow, he petitioned the king to allow him to show a light on Spurn. And in fact, he established the second lighthouse in modern UK. So he did that. We don't know how successful it was, but I'm sure it saved some lives and allowed some ships to get around the dread. These are a couple of pictures of a capstan, winch, and part of an old trawler that tried running the gap, didn't make it. So we do have lots and lots of history of wreckage on Spurn. This is a famous picture of the Thomas being rescued by the lifeboat. This is roughly early 1800s, and it's a picture from the Ferrens Gallery in Hull. But all of the people were saved, so they actually established a lifeboat on Spurn as well as the lighthouses. The lighthouses in the background were Smeaton's lights, and the one next to it is Smeaton's Highlight, which was built in 1776. So we're now shooting on a little bit further in time to the real sort of like maritime and sort of trade history of Spurn and why it was there, why these things were placed there, why the lighthouses were put there. Here's a gentleman who served at Smeaton's Light. This is Wells Howditch, and he served there in 1822, around the time when Spurn became an island, and it was quite a dramatic time for the people working down there and living down there. There was quite a community developed of fishermen, lifeboatmen, lighthouse keepers, and coast guards, and they actually. Spurn was its own little community. Had a couple of pubs, had a shop, post office, and it all started to really kick off in the 1800s at Spurn. So the lifeboat, that was actually established in 1810, and it was part of the Constable estate, who had actually gained the tenancy of Spurn, the ownership of Spurn, from the Angle family, who were lighthouse builders in the 1600s. And the Constable family actually owned Spurn, and it became part of the estate. And they realised that there was so much wreckage going on, and lives been lost on the Binks, the Dread, that they established the first lifeboat station there. It was also Hull Trinity House that made sure that it was crewed. It was crewed by people from Kilnsea and Easington, and there was just one man, the coxswain, that stayed down at Spurn itself. So it was a bit of a problem getting hold of people to actually do a rescue when they saw a blue light being shone on the Binks, which is the sign that we're in trouble, and it could be sometimes 2 or 3 hours before they got a crew to take the boat out. So they decided it would be best to build some houses on Spurn and keep people down there. So they built the lifeboat cottages in the mid 1800s, and they also built a school. Spurn became and the building just sort of like gable end on in the picture in the far corner. That is the old school of Spurn. So they established a school, and they had the coast guards, the lifeboat people, lifeboat keepers, their families, coast guard families, lighthouse people with their families. So it was quite a thriving community. And at one point, there was even problems with starvation because they didn't have enough food, because they produced their own food on site. And in the stormy weather and when times were hard, some people actually had to leave Spurn because they were in such a poor state. So it wasn't all literally plain sailing there. So one of the things that happened on Spurn for a long time, really from the 1700s up to the turn of the last century, was turn of the 19th century, was the collection of gravel and ballast and cobbles for building, for putting in ships, for putting in the whaling ships that came down from Hull. They had to have ballast. And then when they went up to the Arctic, they got the whales, they chucked the ballast out into the Arctic. So there's bits of Spurn up in the Arctic Ocean, and many of the farm buildings around, the old farm buildings around Holderness, are built out of cobbles collected from Spurn. Obviously, this would have had an effect on Spurn at 50,000 tons a year been collected. So there's a map of 1822, which shows you Spurn as an island. You can see that it's clearly got a breach, and that was a time when really the commerce was really increasing, and lots of ships were coming up and down the estuary. So something had to be done about this. So they decided that they would start doing some defences. And after another major storm in 1849, which broke Spurn into 3 separate islands, they really thought they'd better do something about it. So the port authorities got their heads together and started building sea defences. These are some more modern sea defences from the I think these are from the mid-war years, which shows you that they would make revetments with chalk at the back, and then that would hold the sea back. And they also made groins which went out at right angles to the longshore drift, which would catch the sand and stabilise Spurn. So really, from about the early 1800s right up to the 1950s, Spurn was being protected and stabilised with artificial sea defences. And this was done firstly under the auspices of the port authorities and eventually by the military, who took over Spurn in the 1900s. So Spurn has been kind of modified and played with since then. Quite recent times, really. Before then, it was a very naturalised sort of sandspit, but now it's starting to go back to that, and we'll talk about that later. So the actual Victorian Times, late 1800s into the early 1900s, was an amazing time, almost like the best time on Spurn for its community. There was a real thriving fishing, lifeboat, and lighthouse community, along with the coast guards. There was a pub, the Lifeboat Inn. There was a post office, shops, and people actually came on day trips to Spurn from as far away as Hull in steamers, and they landed on Spurn, and they would promenade around Spurn itself. Beautiful place. And the new lighthouse was built in 1895. That's the present one that we've had restored recently. That one was, it ran until 1985, and it was state-of-the-art Victorian lighthouse building, really. So it had this tourism side of it. It had the lighthouses working at the best. The lifeboat crews paid and much more secure in their houses. One of the problems that we had at that time was there were so many people coming on Spurn, and it was absolutely covered in little terns' nests in the summer. This is a little tern with its chick, and they're a very, very protected bird. But then people would collect the eggs, and they would actually throw them at one another, and use them, collect the eggs for egg collecting, and even play cricket with the eggs. So this was a bit of an outrage. So the Constable Estate employed a warden to look after the tern colony during the summer. And we think that this is possibly one of the first little tern protection schemes in the world. So it probably did start at Spurn, did little tern protection. So there's a little hint of the future of Spurn. This is a rare picture of the lighthouses. There's the old Smeaton's lighthouse. That's the dark one to the right. Then we think there's a visual telegraph in between. That's a small pole in between those lighthouses. The black and white one is the present lighthouse, which was built in 1895, and the white one is the low light that went with Smeaton's light. Smeaton's light was dismantled not long after this picture was taken, and the low light was transformed into a magazine and a water tower later on. So that's just a little bit of a taste of what it was like on Spurn around about the turn of the century. Moving on into the 1900s, you've got the RNLI actually took over the running of Spurn lifeboat station, and they employed a full-time crew, the first one in the country, and for a long time the only one in the country, who were paid. They were retained so as they would be there at a moment's notice to actually launch. And this was the old 1922 lifeboat station that they built, lifeboat house. That's now been removed, but they're still on Spurn, the RNLI, and long may that continue. Moving on into the war years, the First World War broke out in 1914, and Spurn was not really protected. The Humber wasn't that well protected. It had a protection scheme at as far inland as Paul, but further out there wasn't much protection, and they realised that the German fleet, especially after the shelling of the East Coast in 1914, they realised that there was a major gap, and they could easily blockade the Humber and basically cut off our supplies. So they set about building 2 massive batteries at Spurn and Kilnsea, and they used on the left-hand side 9.2-inch guns as an example of one. And they've installed these guns at a place called Green Battery at the point, and that was able to fire a 300-pound shell 16 miles, so it could take out most of their capital ships in that way. There was other guns, 4.7-inch guns at the point, and lots and lots of other defences, submarine defences in the estuary. So in the Second World War, it changed slightly. Technology had moved on. There was aerial assault was the main problem, so bombing. So anti-aircraft guns were moved in, more modern 6-inch guns to take out large ships, quick fire 6-pounders to attack small surface vessels and sort of like look out for any submarine conning towers or whatever. So they learn very, very well. Here's a couple of slides to show you where the actual gunnery went. And the one on the right shows you where the actual searchlights that were horizontal searchlights on the beach could actually search out to, and where the guns can actually fire to. So there was number 1 gun, number 2 gun. This was a Second World War picture, showed you where the twin 6-pounders can actually fire out to, so quite a way. And you'll see a thing there, Balsams Fort. And those were built in, there was 2 forts in the Humber, Balsams and Halesands. They were built in the First World War, but not completed until the end of the war. So they mainly came into their own in the Second World War as anti-aircraft and anti-shipping and anti-submarine devices. So the map on the left, that shows you if you look on it, it shows you another thing about defence of Spurn. The actual groins were the little lines, little dots down on the seaward side of Spurn itself, and they were the groins that were actually on the map as well. And it shows you Balsams Fort, and it shows you the lighthouses and where the station was for the lifeboats. So moving on, during the war, the First World War, they built a railway on Spurn, and it's quite a famous railway, standard gauge. It went actually from the point all the way up to Kilnsea, 4 miles away. And it took all the materials that they needed to build the 2 massive forts. You'll have to come on one of our military safaris to actually find out more about them, because there's so much to tell you about the military history of Spurn. On the left-hand side, you see one of the strange contraptions that they used, mainly between the wars, to actually get backwards and forwards up and down the peninsula. These things went up to 60 miles an hour in a good wind, and this is a sailing bogie, had a big sail on it, and a standard sort of set of wheels, and it flew along about 3 minutes to get from one end of Spurn to the other. Bit of a scary ride, I'd expect. So the train there, the locomotive, is a famous one, the Kenyon, and probably that rail carriage is still down at Spurn as part of one of the houses at Kilnsea. Here's the forts. There's Halesands Fort on the south side of the estuary, and then there's Balsams Fort, and that's in the foreground nearer to Spurn. This is a plan of what Balsams Fort was built like, with 11-inch steel armour plating, buried down 100 feet into the chalk at the bottom. It even had its own water supply. So quite a contraption. So it could hold out for a long time. Not a popular place to be stationed on, I'd expect, but it certainly served its purpose, particularly in the Second World War, of preventing any surface ships getting in. Not many submarines. I'm not sure how many got through, but not many, because it had a boom between 2 forts, and it also had a lot of anti-aircraft guns on it as well. So quite a formidable thing. This is a rare picture of Spurn just after the war, showing the peninsula all the way down to, you can see some features of the lighthouse, and then you get right down to the point. And the whole of the point beach was kept clear of vegetation. And that was so as the gunnery at the twin 6-pounders and the 6-inch guns, which you can just see where the vegetation starts, they had a clear line of fire. And it shows you the lifeboat station and the naval pier, which joined onto the railway line. So that's what it looked like at the time. So again, massively modified by the military and absolutely covered in concrete. And there's an aerial shot looking down. This is later. This is in 1969, and it shows you just how the point has vegetated up. Nature's taking over. And of course, after the war, nature did start to really take over, the Second World War. And still a lot of buildings and barracks that were eventually removed or repurposed into different uses for the port authorities. So now we've got a shot, again, probably mid-1950s, early 1960s, showing you the housing for the lifeboat crew and the families, the old school, all the military buildings that were built during the wars, compared to the picture you saw earlier on. Quite a lot of stuff was put in, lots of Nissen huts and points where people could do. Just down in the left-hand corner is quite a significant building. That's, the right-hand corner. That was the Royal Observatory observation post. And that was because the Royal Observatory actually had a permanent base, which is the only one in the country, I think, at Spurn during the Second World War, looking for aircraft. So after the Second World War, we move into more calmer times, more peaceful times, and Spurn has always been a place where naturalists and birders in particular have flocked to see rare birds and wildlife spectaculars. It's an amazing place for other wildlife too, but one of the organisations that really took Spurn on, particularly after the war in 1946, was the Spurn Bird Observatory. And they've had a presence there ever since. Ringing birds. This is a sparrow been rung, and then studying the captures of these birds in different parts of the world. It really informed our understanding of the movements and population dynamics of birds. So that's one of the main things of Spurn. And yes, people started to really think, oh, it's something really special for wildlife. After the war, you had a lot of people who had been bird watching whilst been on sort of station, in the forces, and bird watching became a very, very popular pastime. Still is, and it's like I say, Spurn is a mecca for wildlife enthusiasts. It's not just the birds. There's your flowers. There's your pyramidal orchid. Your fish. Lots of fishermen come down Spurn and use Spurn to go fishing, but also there's the marine wildlife that's down here as well. And your waders, your birds that come from miles and miles away to overwinter at Spurn and then fly off to breed elsewhere. So it is a real haven for wildlife, and as such, it's a national nature reserve, and so many designations cover it. Our friends the roe deer coming and saying hello. We often see them down at Spurn. Again, a safe refuge for them, and they're part of our sort of like big fluffy things. We have Brent geese. It's renowned for its wintering Brent geese is Spurn, and they feed on the eelgrass, which grows at Spurn as well. And our little friendly common seal. We get lots of grey seal as well. So it's an amazing place, and it's now calmed down into nature reclaiming Spurn, really. Lots of old buildings were purposed. This was the battery that used to be at the Warren, which is at the top end of Spurn, near the gate. And there was a battery of 4 anti-aircraft guns, and this was the accommodation for the personnel that looked after them. After the site was purchased by the Yorkshire Naturalist Trust, which became the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, the one on the left, the building on the left, became the warden's house. And the Nissen hut in front was his garage and store, and then the buildings at the back were run by the Spurn Bird Observatory as their accommodation for people visiting and people doing scientific study on Spurn. So Spurn has been all about change and repurposing things, and those now have been removed because we're rewilding this area. So they've been recorded but removed so they're not there anymore. The real game changer was 2013, and we're getting close to the time where we're up to almost present day now. So it shows you here an aerial picture of 1989 when Spurn was totally intact. The road went right to the point. People came down, they paid at the gate, and they went down and enjoyed their day, whatever they were doing, fishing, bird watching, natural history, sunbathing, whatever. They were doing that down at Spurn. It was great, brilliant, but times were changing. And so was the climate's changing. We're not sure whether climate change caused the breach of 2013, but it actually was. It did. A massive storm and tidal surge came through, caused immense problems all the way down the east coast. But at Spurn, it actually broke the narrow little bit of road that was connecting the point area with the mainland, and it created a breach at first, which now has turned into what we call a washover. Breach is not the right term for it, because a breach means that it's basically cut off even at low water, but you can get across the Spurn at low water, and most tides it's safe, but some tides it isn't, and we always warn people about that. But this was taken the day after the surge, this picture, and it shows just how the North Sea has just punched a hole through Spurn at the narrow neck, and it also flooded Chalk Bank and further down. So quite a dramatic change, but it's not the end of Spurn, not by a long chalk. This is a picture of the washover at high tide, and when it was misbehaving, we call it. There was the water pipe was exposed. It took a lot of services out, but no road. The road was broken, and it hasn't been replaced. Volunteers help Spurn a lot now. If it wasn't for volunteers, Spurn would be just awful, because they collect all the litter. The amount of marine pollution is just terrible on Spurn. So we pick this up, and this group did a big cleanup after the tidal surge of 2013. So really we're coming towards where it's kind of like, in a way, a bit my project, in a way, which is establishing the Spurn Gateway project and the Heritage Lottery project. We wanted to get the lighthouse restored. We did that in 2016 and opened it to the public. So the lighthouse was restored as a kind of a tourist attraction, but also a historic building. It's a Grade 2 listed building, so we have a duty of care to look after it. It's proved very popular. This year, maybe not, but maybe in the future years it will do, because obviously with the restrictions. We also do the safaris, and they're very well attended, using a 4x4 truck to get across the washover, and we run those on a regular basis when we're allowed, and again, very popular, telling you the history of Spurn, showing you the wildlife. And really, Spurn is all about the wildlife. It's all about looking after this amazing place that nature has started to sort of claim back, in a way, and always has sort of had a modifying effect. So we do military tours of the area. There's lots and lots of tunnels and old buildings still left on the site, and we've had our military gang that have done some work with that. So we do military tours. We show people, what there is to see wildlife wise, and we also look after our volunteers, and here's a group of volunteers at the point having a barbecue. So it's really nice to have this community at Spurn of people who really want to do the right thing for it. And finally, showing you possibly the future. This is present and future. We've got the Discovery Centre, which was built back in 2018, opened in 2018, and that's the next chapter of Spurn, to see how we sort of like encourage people to come to Spurn and enjoy it and look after it. And that's really what we're all about. So thank you very much for listening. And I hope I haven't gone too long, but maybe edited down a little bit. Thank you very much.